You're listening to the Rent Roll Radio Show with Sterling Chapman.
Hey, Rent Roll Radio listeners, welcome back to the show. As always, I'm your host, Sterling Chapman. Today, we are joined by Mackenzie Grate with Mac of All Trades. Mackenzie actually reached out to me on Instagram, and she said she loved our show, but we needed more women on the show, and I couldn't agree with her more. So I told her she needed to step up and come on and help us fill the gap. So, Mackenzie, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So can you, do you go by Mackenzie or Kinsey? I know on your Instagram it said Kinsey, but I see it says Mackenzie.
Yeah. I go by it all. Mac, Kenzie, Kenzo. My friends from home call me Mo. So, whatever.
Awesome. So can you tell us your story, how you got into real estate, what you did before and what you're doing now?
Sure. So I'm actually, by daytime, as you can probably see here, I'm an assistant principal at a middle school in East New York.
Awesome.
Fun stuff, always an adventure for sure. Lots of stories there. But in terms of real estate, I officially started investing back in 2017. So long story short, I'm not from New York originally. I live here in Brooklyn. And like every other young person, realized it was very expensive, and then the buy-in was probably going to be too
Where
hard
are you
for
from?
me.
Where are you from originally?
Northern California.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so the buy-in was really high here in the city. So I decided to look outside the city, and I came across this town called Kingston, New York, which is about 90 miles north of the city. And just through research online, I was like, this looks like it has everything going for it. And so I decided to go up there and look for houses. And I did. I went up there that first day. I didn't even own a car, mind you. I had never been to this town at all. I'd only researched it online. I didn't know a soul who lived there. So I put in an offer on a single family house, and it rented immediately. And that was kind of the start of the journey 4 years ago.
So how many are you up to today?
So now I am closing on my 8th unit, which I've been taking it kind of slow, I'll be honest, just because I really want to make sure that I am building a house of bricks, not out of straw.
Absolutely. I can empathize with the challenges associated with growing too fast. There's nothing wrong with taking your time. I made mistakes on my 40th property that I should not have made. I should have learned from my first one, but I bought my 40th one too soon after my first one. So I certainly encourage everyone to take it slow, and you're very right in assuming that you'll make less mistakes as you go, because the mistake you make on the first one, you'll learn from it before you make it 7 more times.
Yeah. That being said, though, I'm definitely focusing on scaling up this year. This has been so the other part of the challenge up there was I started investing pre-COVID, knowing that the market was already going strong. And then once COVID hit, everyone from New York City moved up there. Literally, it became, which was a blessing in disguise, because I did have 2 vacancies at the time. So they rented out for more than I anticipated. But since then, it's definitely been very hard to find, I'm sure in most parts of the country as well, to find a good deal. So it's one of those things where this year, now that things are starting to, I wouldn't say settle down, but starting to balance out a little bit more, I'm absolutely ready to buy some more.
So how are you finding your deals?
So I'll be honest, most of mine have been on the MLS, and that's not for a lack of trying otherwise. I do mailers, I do driving for dollars. I ask anyone and everyone if they're interested in selling. But I've just happened to find the deals on the MLS, and they usually have something that is really deterring other people from buying them. So the first unit that I bought up there, the tenant who was living there at the time was absolutely challenging to show the place. She was, I would say crazy. So realtors didn't even want to show the place. They were like, no, not that house. So yeah, we went in, and I was like, we're doing it anyways. And it ended up being good because she already was planning on moving out. A lot of people didn't know that. Her lease was ending. She was buying another place. So it wasn't like I would have to inherit her. So it's like, okay, yes, it's going to be annoying to schedule the inspection. Yes, she's probably going to be around the property, but it's worth it if I'm going to get a good deal. I'll put up with that for a few visits, Um, yeah. And then in terms of other ones from the MLS, I find a lot of times that it's worked out where it's like, I usually buy in the winter when prices are down and less people are looking. And I usually buy properties that pop back on the market for one reason or another, because then that tells me there's something about them that,
Fell through.
exactly.
During the inspection period.
Fell through. The sellers are more motivated than ever. They just want to get it done and be out with it. And yeah, I also find that a lot of times if people are unloading in the winter already, they are more motivated than in other seasons, especially here in the Northeast when there literally is like snow everywhere. So people aren't looking to move
Sure.
or anything.
Yeah, definitely. So how are you financing the properties?
Yeah, the first ones were conventional. I would just save up 20%, do the overtime thing. Anything that I got from the properties, I would put into another account to kind of spiral it. I'm starting to do hard money this time around on this duplex, and I'll be honest, I'm a little nervous only because it's something new. But I realize, the more I was listening to podcasts this year, I was like, that's the next step. Like I said I was going to scale and I'm going to have to scale. And that's a way to do it. So I've got a hard money lender who I love, TMD Capital out of Massachusetts. And Theo's been amazing. And he's been helping me. He's been helping some of my clients because I'm also a real estate agent. So it's been a good process so far.
Yeah, it's a hard jump to make. So I was afraid to do it for a long time. So I my first couple of houses I bought, I just put, the down payment, like you said, and then
Yep.
I did some burrs, but it was really like kind of it was it wasn't really like me doing the burrs because it was a little set of duplexes that I roped in a partner who was like had experience flipping houses and had investors. So it was kind of
Yeah,
like him, you know what I'm saying? I was leveraging my risk with him because he knew what he was doing.
absolutely.
And then I kind of like I went back and I bought some other things creatively, but I think I waited like a year before I was really like confident enough to take cash from a private money lender, go buy like a really distressed property, fix it up myself, and
Yep.
see it through the like whole burr process of getting appraised, and then like the money coming back from the bank. And it stressed me out. Like it doesn't stress me out anymore, but like it stressed me out for like the first like 5. I'm like, oh my God, is it going to appraise? Oh my God, am I
Yep.
going to find like some crazy thing that's going to cost me $20,000? You know what I'm saying? Like
Exactly.
it's a nerve-wracking process the first several times you go through it.
It totally is, because it's also like the timeline is shortened, right? So if you're like a
Mhm.
first time buyer, or at least up here in the Northeast, it takes probably 60 to 90 days to close on the house. So you have time to kind of like, adjust and be like, okay, now I'm through that stage and on to the next. But when you do
Yeah.
a hard money, it's like 2 weeks and you're
Yeah.
closing.
Yeah.
But I realized this was a blessing in disguise, because the other thing that I didn't know is you get better rates when you have experience. So now I have
Yeah.
these properties with conventional loans, and while it was slow going to get those up and running, now I have this experience that looks really good on paper to hard money lenders. So they're giving me better rates quicker, and they essentially trust me more, which I'm like, oh, that's nice.
So I love that you are an educator and also doing a real estate. So I'm sure you probably already know who he is, but if you don't, I encourage you to follow Frank Patalona with the Cash Flow Kings. Frank
Yes.
Frank was a teacher turned real estate agent turned real estate investor. He's a friend of mine. He's a super awesome dude. And he actually showed me how to set up Instagram. So
Oh,
I
nice.
met I met Frank at the Joe Fairless event last year. Um, and he goes, oh yeah, man, I got like 10,000 followers on Instagram. You got to do it. Here, let me see your phone. I'll show you how to do it. And he set up my Instagram.
Yep. It's funny you mentioned that, because I'm a little iffy about Instagram. Like, I definitely love it and I think it's important, and I've gotten great connections for like, growing and scaling my business up there. But as an educator, like, the kids definitely try and find me. You know what I mean? So I'm
Sure.
like, I don't,
Yeah.
I've got to walk that balance, because also, I mean, I'm happy to share real estate, and I definitely, my teachers even come ask me, and I'm happy to share whatever I know. But at the same time, I don't want kids thinking that I'm walking around, just throwing $100 bills everywhere. I'm like, nope,
Right.
I'm still broke. Let's be clear.
Yeah, people don't understand how broke real estate investors are.
Right.
We're like
We're
the
always
most
broke because
cash.
we're always getting our last pennies together to buy that next property. You know.
Also, my brother is an assistant principal, and
Oh, nice.
we've partnered on several deals. He's invested in several of my deals. So and he loves it. You know, it works. It's been great for both of us. So and he's also like always trying to hide from the kids on with me. You know, I have a day job, so I'm trying to hide from my employer
Yeah.
on social media. I'm not as worried about it as Instagram, because I don't think my 56-year-old boss has Instagram, but I kind of go
Facebook.
in and block everybody on Facebook.
Yep. Yep.
And I just stay away from LinkedIn altogether because I've got hundreds of coworkers on there. But we I'm glad that you're making the move to the Burrs, to because that's really,
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't have any type of exponential growth trying to save up 20% every time. What
Yeah.
what is your goal for the next year? You said this year you really want to scale up. How do you plan on doing that?
Yeah. So this year I plan to buy 2 more properties, investment properties, and then I plan to buy some sort of property for me to stay in when I'm upstate. Because right now, what I've been doing is I just closed on the fourplex. One of the units got renovated. And while the project was happening, that's where I was crashing. So I'd like bring my air mattress, and just sleep in the work site, which I loved, by the way. But that's kind of been the plan lately is, it's a joke that I have all these properties up there, but I have nowhere to stay myself. So I plan to at some point buy a fixer upper that I can live in and do like a fix and flip, and then maybe Airbnb it out afterwards and go on to the next project, but something more permanent for me to stay in each weekend. I'd like to get to 20 units in a couple of years. That's my goal. For now, hopefully, I'll be able to do that. But it's one of those things too, where I want to make sure that I'm doing it right. You know what I mean? Like that. I feel like once you start to scale up, then you get excited to scale, and I have to control myself and be like, no, make sure it's a really good deal. Just because I'm excited and I'm ready, I still have to make sure the numbers work how they need to work.
So let's talk about that. What does a really good deal look like to you? How much are you paying for these properties? How much do they rent for? How much are your notes on your in financing? What are the
Yeah.
numbers?
Well, it definitely varies depending upon whether it's a single family or a multifamily. What I'm trying to do is to get at least $300 a door after all is said and done each month, cash flow. And in terms of a good deal, it's hard to say because some of them require 2 or 3 years. So for example, I bought this fourplex back in February. I bought it for, I'll just give you the numbers, 289. There are 4 units. All of the people there were paying like 785. So that was one of the challenges of why I wasn't selling, because it didn't look good on paper. And, we're in the moratorium, so you can't evict at all. So I went through and I met all of the tenants and spoke to them about, the 2-year plan. It needs a new roof, it needs new windows, it needs, a lot of work in each of the units, to be honest. So I told them straight away that, I would be raising the rent, still not to market value, but I would be raising it about $300 per unit. And here's why, and this is where the money's going. And they all agreed because they know how difficult it is to find a rental up in the area that I'm at. So I felt like that was a fair compromise. You know what I mean? I don't want to put an added burden on anyone. I also gave them 90 days notice. So it wasn't, it's required if they've been there a long time. And all of these tenants had been there for 4 to 9 years, I think was the longest one. So like they had clearly had a relationship with the older gentleman who was selling it, and I didn't want to come in and just be that young person that kicks everyone out and raises the rent. So that was the plan. I was going to hold on to that for a year, not do anything. Then, when people start moving out, start turning them over. But one of the tenants actually gave their 1 month's notice. And at first I felt really bad. I was like, oh God, it's probably because of our conversation. But the tenant downstairs, Timothy, he was just like, no, it has nothing to do with that. It's he's getting married. He has a kid now. And, he just wants to essentially relocate and buy a home. So I was like, oh, perfect. So that 1 unit then became available the very next month. So I went in there, I fixed it up and rented it out for $1,500. So essentially doubling it from what it was before. So yeah, and that's kind of the plan. You know what I mean? So like a good deal to me is if I can do that over the course of 1 or 2 years, it's going to be cash flowing a lot, but it doesn't look like a great deal the very first second. You know what I mean? It like takes a little bit of work to get it to where you need it to.
Well, it's a long game.
Yeah.
That's an insane deal. So you found that on the MLS?
I found it on the MLS. It was taken off the MLS because it went into contract, and then they did the inspection and realized the roof needed to be done. You know, like a lot of work needed to be done, and all of the units like were pretty. I wouldn't say they were in terrible shape, but they were like definitely from the 50s. You know, like you could tell work hadn't been done since then.
$1,500 a unit. That's $6,000.
That's the plan. I only have one at that right now, but hopefully I'll get all 4 of them eventually. But I will say all of the tenants are great. So, you know, I let them know, you know, each year it is going to go up moving forward, because the other thing I realized as a landlord, you have a responsibility to keep up with maybe not exact market, but you need to raise your rents, because a lot of people get in this situation tenants wise. And I know I was there once as a tenant too, where you have this amazing landlord who never raises the rent. You have a great relationship, and then they go to sell the building and you realize, oh my gosh, I can't afford anything else because I've gotten so used to this cost of living. And suddenly there's no place available that's going to fit within that budget. And that's a scary feeling. And I'm noticing even now as a realtor, when I go in with my clients who are looking to buy duplexes, or fourplexes or whatever, that the first look is fear on the tenant's face, because they're paying well below, and they have been paying well below for a long time, and they know there is nothing out there. If they get kicked out, not that you can right now, but you know what I mean, like essentially that they're not going to be able to find something anywhere near their price range. So it's definitely tough. No one likes raising rent. It doesn't feel good, but I think it's important that you kind of stay within a ballpark of the market value for the sake of your tenants, because heaven forbid, you know, something happens to you, your property has to get sold. It's a scary thing for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how much you seem to care about your tenants. That's a rarity in this industry. So it's great that you're out there giving the industry a different look. That's awesome to hear your compassion and around that. When you say cash flow $300 a unit, do you walk us through kind of like what exactly do you mean from cash flow? I'll explain. I'll elaborate on the question. So like my first house, my note was 580, and I rented it out, or no, it was 560, and that was principal, interest, insurance, and taxes. And I rented it out for 1060, and I was like, hey, I'm cash flowing $500 a month. And everybody's like, wow, $500 a month, that's crazy. But in reality, right, we had maintenance issues, we had vacancy issues, and then I ultimately moved it to property management. So like, it's really cash flowing like $150. You know? Right. So when you say 300, I'm just curious what all that includes.
Yeah. So because I live down here in Brooklyn, I definitely have a property manager. So it has to pay for that. And my property manager's amazing. It has to pay for, you know, all of everything that you're talking about. Like I have a fund for like major repairs that are going to happen over time. You anticipate like the roof needs to be replaced in 15 years. So I save a percentage of that each month and put it directly into a fund so that when that time comes, it's there. You know, I don't pay any of, on the single families, I don't pay any of the electricity or gas, that's on them. But in the multifamilies, there is a landlord, like you pay the hallway lighting and that sort of stuff. So you have to account for that. Same thing with the multifamilies, like you have to account for lawn care, whereas a single family, you don't. One surprise bill after I closed on my first one was water. Having never owned a home, and you know, I own a spot in Brooklyn too, but it's a co-op, so you don't pay for the water. So when that bill popped up out of nowhere, I was like, oh, okay, that I've got to factor that in, and we have to talk about like, you know, what ways we can be more water efficient on my rentals forward. So when I say pure cash flow, I'm talking about after all of those fees, I wanted to ideally in a perfect world, get to a place where it's at least cash flowing $300 as the unit. And sometimes that'll happen, in a year. Hopefully not too much more than that. I can handle a few months of it not being, exactly at the number that I want, but there has to be a plan to get there in a reasonable amount of time.
Awesome. So how much do you set aside when you're running those numbers? How much do you do for maintenance? How much do you do for CapEx? And how much do you do for like vacancy contingency? Is it I've heard people say, oh, I'll do $200 a month. I've heard other people say, I'll do 5% a month. So like, what does that number, what does that calculation look like for you?
Yeah, for me, I do 5% for the vacancy. I do 5% for the CapEx, and I do 5% for maintenance.
Okay.
I don't know if that's always enough. Usually, like sometimes you get surprises, and you're like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna have to, ante up a little bit more this month." But it tends to be fine because I'm not really honestly spending any of the cash flow. Like I'm putting that all into an account to then buy another property. So if that gets set back a couple of months, yeah, that sucks. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I got to replace the hot water heater and I wasn't quite to my savings goal yet. But I definitely feel strongly that any investor should not buy an investment that pays out of pocket to start. You know what I mean? Like you need to make sure that it's cash flowing from the very beginning and that you've got a comfortable buffer zone. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to have to pay something out of pocket, like maybe 3 months in because you're getting it up and running. But ideally, that happens less and less as you get more of an emergency fund built up, as you get more of these accounts built up. It should be doing all the work for you, ideally. If you're paying out of pocket for any of it, aside from like maybe your very first one and like, within that first year you have an unforeseen cost, then it's not really an investment. It becomes more of a burden. Even if it's only just here and there, it's an added stressor. It should be like something that is helping make your life easier.
Absolutely. So that leads me to my next question. What other advice do you have for somebody who's looking to get started? Somebody who's in your situation when you started however many years ago. What advice do you have? What lessons have you learned that you feel like sharing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot, a lot of lessons that I've learned. I think the main thing, and I would probably speak since you already introduced how I reached out to you. I think I want to speak more to women because I feel like a lot of women are ready to get started because you hear about women investors, but not so much. What you really hear about is like couples, right? The girl's into design and the guy's going to handle all the construction and the numbers and the spreadsheets. You know what I mean? I would say that no, you can do it on your own. So like I'm married, I have a great husband. He's not into real estate, but he's supportive, but as an investor, it's nerve-wracking when you know your weaknesses, right? Like when you know that there's an area that you're less comfortable with. Maybe it's bookkeeping, maybe it's the actual construction, whatever it is. Know that you can always find other people to add to your team that will help you with those areas of weakness. And it doesn't have to be your spouse. It doesn't have to be a family member. There are just so many people out there who are willing to help. You just have to ask. Instagram has been amazing in that regard. Like I literally DM people who I see doing stuff and ask them questions, and 99.99% of the time they are excited to talk and they have great advice and they're like, here's what I did in that situation, or here's what I recommend. So you can do it on your own. Don't wait for someone to give you permission or wait for someone to reassure you that you can do it. You'll figure it out as you go. And just keep going. Don't give up. Each property gets easier. The first one's the hardest. And the first new step at any level is the hardest. Like right now, I told you I'm doing the hard money thing and I'm like a little anxious, but I know it'll work out. You know what I mean? It's part of the process.
So when you sent me that message, I actually went and looked at my my old episodes because I feel like I have interviewed a lot of women, and I feel like I've been like super impressed with a lot of rock star women who are very much doing it all on their own. Like you said, their husband just doesn't have any interest. I think about like Suni Rao, Anna Kelly, I mean, there's been a lot of really good women on the podcast, and a lot of really great women in the industry that are not on my podcast. Um, that that there's so many people out there. You certainly don't need to ask permission from anybody to get started. And I don't think that men in any way have an advantage in this industry. I don't know why there tends to be more, but I certainly had, like, I guess you think like traditional uh, gender roles, and you think like, oh, men are more into construction. I could not hang a door when I started. I mean, I'm like the most construction like illiterate person there is. And like you said, you could hire somebody for pretty much anything.
Yeah.
So there shouldn't be any of those barriers of entry. I would say the only probably thing standing in anybody's way is the mindset, and that you need
Yeah.
to develop around.
Well, and I think women have a harder time putting themselves out there. Like I think just as a society, and we're getting a lot better, but women are critical of themselves, so it's like nerve wracking to be like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this. And I'm going to, I've definitely noticed that like in negotiations, sometimes obviously I have a high pitched voice and I look like I'm 14. So sometimes like initially people, cannot take me seriously, but then as they get to know me over time, they're like, oh, wait, she is a serious buyer, or, oh, yep, she does have some properties and she knows what she's doing. I think it's always that sort of initial putting yourself out there that can be intimidating sometimes. But I think it's important that people just do it, whether you're a man or a woman, but women especially, just do it. I mean, there's going to be some mean people out there who are going to say stuff, who might try and take advantage of you. But once you realize that, you're just like, on to the next one. There's enough good people out there. As long as you continue to look to find them and don't give up, you're going to get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to move over to our radio round a little bit,
Yeah.
just to help our listeners get to know you a little bit better. And since you're a fan of the show, I did not prep you for the question. So if you get caught off guard, we're going to know you're not really a fan of the show. First question is, what's your favorite book?
So I actually wrote this down because I love this book. It is The Money, A Love Story by Kate Northrup.
Okay.
And essentially, I feel like it lays the groundwork, or at least for me, it laid the groundwork of even getting to a place with money where I was like, oh, I can get enough money to get into real estate. I think looking at that relationship is really, really important, because especially like even when scaling, like I'm naturally a pessimist. I'm naturally of the scarcity mindset. I know I need to work on that. I keep working on it. I've come a long way, but there's always that fear of like, are you going to run out of money? Is something going to, is the whole house of cards going to collapse? Is this really happening? Or,
the more properties you get, the better. It doesn't get any better. It gets worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Then you're like, oh my gosh, if I lose
the mountain of debt, the larger it is, the more
Yes.
crushing it feels.
Yes. And just like the paying the different ones each month and all of the bills, I feel like every time I open my email now, there's a new bill that I have, which I knew, but it's still like, oh man, can there just be one day where I don't get an automatic announcement about paying something?
So I have a great property manager, and I know you said you do too, and most people don't say that, and I've seen so many bad ones out there, but my property manager's the main thing. The main reason I think he's great is because he's a friend of mine that I trust, and I think that's the major thing with the property management, is finding somebody you can trust, because there's so many out there ripping people off. But he would get in the habit, because we would talk every day before he managed my properties. Yep. And so he would get in the habit of calling me every day. Oh man, this broke at this property. This broke at this property. And I'm like, dude, quit telling me, because like I'm emotionally, like I get it. And at the end of the month, I'll see the bill and it's fine. But I turn it over to you, because it puts me like on an emotional roller coaster, seeing that ding come through 5 times a day. So like, stop telling me about it. Let me just take my medicine at the end of the month. And
maybe I need to try that approach, because I'm the opposite. I'm like, Alec, what's going on over here? I heard there was a call. Tell me what's going on. And I'm like constantly following. Maybe I'll let that go more as I get older. But what you're saying about a good property manager is crucial. I had a bad property manager before. I didn't know he was bad until like a year and a half into it. And then it was just like the first turnover, and what should have taken 1 month, turned into like 3 months. And I was like, okay, this just can't happen. So one other advice for newbies who are getting a property manager, I would actually get one with a full team, not a one-man shop. Like they need to have a department that is specifically for maintenance. They need to have their bookkeeping department. Because if it's just one person who's promising to do it, it's when it gets really difficult during those turnover seasons or whatnot, you're not going to get it done as quickly as you need to, and time is money.
Absolutely. What is your favorite quote?
So recently it's been "everything is figure outable" from Marie Forleo, because I do think that is true. And I think that helps with my anxiety sometimes, because, when you get that said call from the property manager and you're like, oh God, I didn't even think that was going to happen. It's like, all right, we'll figure it out. It's no big deal. It'll work out.
Yeah. Everything is figure outable. And the more times, the more things you figure out, the more like comfortable you get with everything is figure outable.
Yep, definitely.
So what's your favorite thing to do when you're not working? Because it seems like you work a lot between school and real estate.
Yes. I have 2 adorable pugs, Toby and Kiwi. So I like to take them to the park, although Toby likes to go more because he needs the exercise. Kiwi would prefer to sleep all day if she could. So I try and do that every night, take little Toby for a walk if the weather's nice. I like to hang out with my husband, obviously. Non-COVID times, I love to travel. And then I do a lot of yoga. I have a great yoga studio that I check in each week, and they've just been amazing. So that's a good de-stressor.
Awesome. Absolutely. So where can our listeners find out more about you and get in touch with you and fund your future deals and invest in your deals?
Definitely Instagram is where I'm probably most active, and that's Mac of All Trades NY. So you can reach me there. And I also have a blog called macofalltradesny.com. And that's where I blog about all things real estate, design, even some money and investing sort of stuff. And I definitely would love for people to reach out. I'm always looking to connect and help in any way I can.
Awesome. And she's an educator, so those blogs are going to have excellent grammar.
Oh, no. My husband actually does the editing because I have terrible grammar. And he's like, did you read this first? I was like, I thought so.
Awesome. Well, Mackenzie, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on all your success so far. And I know you're going to just continue to blow it out of the water. So I'm looking forward to keeping up with the Mac of All Trades and following you on your success journey. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rent Roll Radio Show, brought to you by Crestworth Capital. We hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a rating and review. You can also visit us at crestworthcapital.com or rentrollradio.com, or follow us on Facebook at Rent Roll Radio or at Crestworth Capital. If you would like to reach us, feel free to shoot us an email at info@rentrollradio.com or sterling@crestworthcapital.com. We hope you come back next week to join us on some more of our journey. Until then, happy investing.